On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, we attempt to answer the question, where the hell will the Raptors rank on both offense and defense in the 2023-24 NBA season? I'm very bullish on the defense, less so with the offense, but could it net out to something positive? We'll get into all that on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, October the 13th. Spooky! I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now, going on 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description of the podcast, both on audio and on video. If you want to come hang out with over 200 freaks just like you who can't get enough talking Raptors ball, the Discord is going to be a great place to be throughout the entirety of the upcoming NBA season. Would love to see you in there. Also, you can find the show for free on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. As always, please hit the big fat red button. I think it's black now, maybe on YouTube, whatever the color of the button is. Press it and you will be subscribed and you will get notifications whenever the show goes live. And that is a great thing. You never miss an episode. Of course, we are here every single day, and a big thanks to our everydayers for checking us out and rocking with us all through each and every week. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. All right, on today's show, yesterday we kind of did a little where will they rank within the confines of the Toronto Raptors. Where are all the various players rank in terms of all the box score counting stats, etc. Today, we're going big picture. We're going to look at where the Raptors might rank within the league on offense and defense, and when it comes to net rating as well. And like a caveat before we do all of this, this is extremely hard to predict. Of course, we can do our best to infer what the Raptors might do from the players they have, from the strengths that they have to, their recent performance and things they've done in the past. It's really difficult to predict how the rest of the league is going to take shape. There are teams that surprise with offenses and defense all the bloody time. And so I'm just going to do my darn best here. Please don't hold me to these predictions, but if they're right, of course, I want you to please congratulate me at the end of the season for being so right. With that, we're going to dig into the offense coming up. We'll dig into the overall net rating, but I want to start with the thing that has me the most excited about this Raptors team, and it is the defense. I've been talking about this for a little while now. I am very, very bullish on what this Raptors team can do on the defensive end this year. Just with some subtle tweaks, maybe not so subtle tweaks from what they did under Nick Nurse. You factor in the personnel they have. I kind of think as a roster, this is one of the most defensively talented rosters in the NBA. Of their projected top 11 players, I think you'd say maybe 2 are negative defenders, Grady Dick and Gary Trent Jr., and, 5 of their top 6 players are plus defenders. I think there is, I guess Scotty Barnes kind of is a bit of a wild card here, considering his up and down track record through 2 seasons, but I'm also, as we'll get to, quite bullish on his defense as well. And with that, with some, regression to the mean, as far as some things that didn't go the Raptors' way last season, and just with I think a healthier defensive system, I think this Raptors team can be really, really good on defense. We'll get into my prediction. I'm going to build to it. There's a spoiler. I don't want to get to it all the way at the very end. We're going to have you sort of stick through the segment before I give my hard and fast prediction, but I do think, based on what happened last season, based on the players in tow, based on the changes of the scheme, this team has a chance to really, really rock on defense and give the team a pretty high floor for what it can do as a regular season squad. So let's just kind of look back at last year. Obviously, it's kind of a tale of 2 seasons with the Raptors, the pre-Jakob Poeltl Raptors and the post-Jakob Poeltl Raptors, where they were a much more sensible basketball team with Yak on the roster, both on offense and on defense. They scaled back some of the aggression and just trusted in the 7-foot rim protector, that is Jakob Poeltl, to clean up a lot of their messes, whereas I think before, Their defense created many messes, and we'll get into why they had to do that as it relates to the offense. But I think they didn't quite have someone to do that mop-up duty on the back end when things kind of slipped through the ultra-aggressive scheme that they were running. And Jakob Poeltl allowed them to play a little bit more chill, a little bit less sort of send two to the ball and trust in your massive length and distance covering to go contest open threes. It didn't work out for them well last year. You couple that with some bad luck on the defensive end and the sort of not very good shot profile they allowed. And, I think it's honestly a wonder this team ended up finishing as high as it did on defense. They finished 11th per NBA.com on defense last season. They were 6th after the Jakob Poeltl trade. On cleaning the glass, they were 14th on defense and 9th on cleaning the glass after the Jakob Poeltl trade. So some slight variations there, but similar idea. They got better on defense and moved up the charts with Yak there. They were also victims of bad shooting luck for a lot of last season. And yes, some of that bad shooting luck was kind of invited into the house by them themselves just because of the number of corner threes they were offering up. But if you look at it, this was a objectively bad shooting luck season for the Raptors. They were bottom 3 in 3-point field goal percentage allowed. This is not something that has much carryover from year to year. If you go through the Nick Nurse era, going back to 2019-20, that team was number 1 in 3-point field goal percentage allowed. They were 26th in the Tampa season. They were 18th in the year they went 48-34 and made the 5th seed. And then last year they were 29th in opposing 3-point percentage allowed. That is really bad, but it's not something I think you can bank on happening once again, especially when you consider that the shot profile the Raptors figured to be allowing this coming season with Darko Rajakovic in charge is probably going to be a little less conducive to teams getting a million open corner threes to help balloon their overall 3-point shooting percentage. We've heard Darko talk about it. I asked him about it on media day. He wants to prioritize limiting paint touches and corner threes, which is more or less diametrically opposed to what the Raptors did on defense last season. Per cleaning the glass, they were 23rd in rim attempts allowed last season and 29th in corner threes allowed as a percentage of field goal attempts. That's not good. That is inviting teams to take the most valuable shots on the floor and daring them to miss, and they came up on the wrong side of those dares more often than not. Conversely, they were number 2 in limiting long mid-range attempts, which sounds, number 2, that's great. No, that's bad, actually, because they were taking, the opposing team was taking fewer of the shots that you want teams to be forced into taking. You want to force teams to take 18-footers in lieu of corner threes and shots at the rim. You look at the teams that were the best at forcing teams into long mid-range jumpers last season. It was Milwaukee, Boston, and Philly, all incredible, impenetrable defenses. And that, I think, is a big telltale sign of a defense with kind of a good structure and a good sort of base set of principles that I just don't think the Raptors defense really had last season. When you throw in all the factors, including, the fact that they kind of were forced to play this aggressive style to feed their offense, which wasn't very good. They were forced to play this extremely taxing style of defense with 7 or 8 players on any given night. That's exhausting. You can't sustain that over the course of 82 games. I just think making this a more conservative scheme where you trust in Jakob Poeltl to be a drop big for you, and you kind of have a bit more of a wall against penetration, I think that's going to lead to just a way more healthy shot diet that the Raptors are going to allow, and that in turn is going to see that defensive rating tick back up. To me, this Darko defense feels like, we haven't seen it really. We saw it for one game. We're not sure. He's talked about not switching so much. He's talked about, again, the paint touches and corner threes, like all stuff you want to hear when you're thinking about a defense. We got to see it in practice, but to me, it feels like the defense for this year's team is going to be more tailored to the defensive strengths on the floor for the members of the roster. Whereas I think Nurse's defense last year was more tailored to the offensive deficiencies of his roster and not so much the defensive strengths. I think there's so many good individual defenders on this Raptors team. It would have been nice to see them just kind of guard straight up once in a while last year, or more often than they did. But because they needed to kind of fuel their offense with these sort of manufactured steals and turnovers, I think you ended up kind of losing the plot, and you kind of unspooled the defense quite a bit and didn't allow the players on the team to do the stuff they do best on defense. And so that's going to be big. you got to look at who they got to jump here, right? Obviously there are teams that need to do better than if they're going to jump up in the defensive standings from 11th last season. Teams ahead of them, the Wolves, the Heat, the Sixers, the Suns, the Pelicans, the Bulls, like they're going to have to jump all those teams if they want to get into that top 5 range. Milwaukee, they were number 4 last year. I don't think they're going to have the same defensive juice without Drew Holiday. I think they're going to be more tilted towards offense, which will surely lead to many, many wins. But just in terms of the defensive rankings, maybe they take a little bit of a slight plummet there. The 3 teams at the top, Memphis, Boston, Cleveland, I kind of expect they're all just going to be awesome on defense again. Those are teams with defensive player of the year candidates up and down. Boston's obviously got all the switchable wings and the incredible guard defense of Derek White and Drew Holiday. Those are going to be really, really good defensive teams. Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford back at the rim. Like, they're going to be hard to score on in Boston. Memphis has Jaren Jackson Jr. We know he's just like a one-man wrecking crew defensively. They're huge when they roll him and Steven Adams together. And we know Cleveland has that sort of dueling volleyball blockers at the rim in Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. Those teams feel pretty ironclad as like they're going to be top 5 defenses. After that, the Wolves, I think they have a ton of defensive talent. They also have some weak spots to pick at. Mike Conley Jr. and Karl Anthony Towns, more so than the Raptors have, and they're sort of core rotation guys. We'll see about the Heat. I'm fascinated by the Heat. If Tyler Hero's playing a ton and 37-year-old Kyle Lowry's playing a ton, I think there could be some defensive decay on their end. The Sixers, Joel Embiid himself is a very good defense just walking on the floor, but how does that all work? Ultimately, though, I think the Raptors have the juice to make a jump up the defensive standings pretty significantly this year. I think the ultimate talent on the roster is very real, is very good. And so for me, kind of considering all we've run through here, I'm picking the Raptors to finish 5th on defense. I think this is going to be a top 5 defense. I think this is going to be a defense that really powers the success of this team, and I'm very bullish on it. I just think I'm excited to watch it all. Look, Scotty Barnes is a big swing factor here. I think he needs to kind of level up defensively in a way that I think he's going to do. The starting lineup, if Dennis Schroeder is in there, it's not going to be awesome on offense, as we'll get to, but the defense should be fantastic, and we'll put all of these guys in sort of their optimal positions to succeed. You've got Schroeder containing the ball. You've got Barnes and Siakam as sort of roving help guys who can also guard on the ball. We'll see about Barnes' on-ball stuff. Obviously, that's been a weak spot. OG, we know, is OG. Yak is Yak. I think this is going to be just a really, really nasty defensive team, even when you kind of factor in the guys off the bench. Jalen McDaniels, for example, Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher. These are all plus defenders. Otto Porter Jr. as well. This is going to be a really good defensive team. I'm picking them to finish 5th, which is very, very exciting and a pretty good baseline to have going into the season. We'll come back on the other side, get into the offense, which I'm less bullish on, which I feel like you probably already know if you're an everyday listener of the show. But we will get to why I'm a little down on it and where the Raptors might be able to kind of scrape some extra points out, and why I think even though it might not be as successful an offensive season, it'll be a more fun offensive season to watch at least. We'll get into that in a sec. But first, got to tell you, better friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sports book in all the land. You got to go check them out because right now is the perfect time to snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And you can do it for every sport under the sun as well. The WNBA finals are going on right now. If you want to go put some money on the Vegas Aces pulling off the sweep on Sunday, you can go and do that. If you want to hit the over-under in that game, you can totally go do that. Take the over on Asia Wilson points, for example. She's been dominant. Go check that out. Also, if you're a hockey fan or a baseball fan, there's all that stuff going on right now as well. You got spreads, player props, over-unders, the whole 9 yards. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, we continue on here, trying to figure out where the Raptors are going to land on offense and defense, but by sort of association, net rating. We'll get into that in the back part of the show. But let's start digging into the offense, shall we? Look, I don't think the offense is going to be the strength of this team, even though it will probably be a thing that undergoes just as much, if not more, change than the defense. they're going to try to play differently. And I think that's great because last year was not a pretty sight. It was very, very matchup hunting dependent. There wasn't a ton of off-ball movement or creative sort of solutions when the offense got bogged down. Things got a lot easier for sure after the Jakob-Poeltl trade. There's sort of spamming that Fred Yak pick and roll was a pretty bloody effective tool to go to. But there is going to be, I think, a little bit more variability in how this team plays offense, which on its own is pretty exciting. Going back to last year, 13th on NBA.com's team advanced stats metric in offensive rating, 12th on cleaning the glass. After the Yak trade, they were actually 17th per NBA.com, 14th on cleaning the glass. So they dropped on both after the Jakob-Poeltl trade, despite getting 1 point per possession better or so with Yak on the team. The late part of the season, every team's offense kind of takes off because, they've sort of fine-tuned their schemes. Defenses maybe care less. There are tanking squads that are just kind of giving up points because that's good for their draft pick status, all of that. They dropped to 17th in offense after the Yak trade, but the offense actually performed more effectively. They just weren't as good as sort of relative to the rest of the league. And again, this is really hard to predict, really hard to sort of parse because it's all very relative. And, last year especially, it's a very strange season. Yeah, you can say, they finished 13th. It was great. They were 13th on offense, top half of the league. That's impressive. But when you consider they were also less than 1 point per possession out of 23rd in the league, it gets a little less impressive. It was very clustered in the middle of the league last season. They were one or two sort of stinker games away from being a bottom 10 offense, as all of those teams in that range were for sure. I think that's a worthwhile thing to keep in mind. The middle of the league last year was very, very clustered, probably in kind of an inordinate way compared to league history, though I have not gone back and checked what the rankings of the 13th through 24th teams on offense have been over the last few years. So apologies if I'm broadly sweeping with a wrong generalization there. Either way, they were 13th. They were also, again, 1 point per possession out of being 23rd. It was all very clustered. And there are teams that are going to be better on offense this season than they were last year. I feel pretty sure of that. Teams like the Suns, the Bucks, the Thunder, the Clippers, the Pelicans, the Lakers all finished behind the Raptors on offense last season. And I would say on pure offensive talent, I'm taking probably all of those teams ahead of the Raptors at full health. Of course, we can't assume full health for the Clippers or the Pelicans for sure. There will be other teams that had bad offenses that rise up. I think the Pacers, for example, with another year of Tyrese Halliburton, hopefully healthy all season, the roster additions they made, internal development for some of their guys. I would guess the Pacers probably have a better offense than the Raptors. There will be teams that jump them that you don't even really expect. That said, there are teams ahead of them that are probably going to fall back as well. I think like the Nets, for example, are going to have a worse offense as they kind of turn the keys entirely over to Mikal Bridges. And even like the Jazz. The Jazz were a top 10 offense last season. Does Lauri Markkanen have another All-NBA season, All-NBA caliber season in him where he shoots like 65% true shooting? We'll see. It's hard to do that. Very few people in history have ever done that type of thing. And so did the Jazz drop back a little bit just as maybe the victim of the Western Conference being so bloody good? Do all of their numbers kind of get suppressed because they're just not in that upper crust of teams of, the 12 competitive Western Conference squads? Ultimately, I think my sort of big takeaway on the offense is it's going to be worse on a points per possession basis. I feel pretty confident about that, or at least where it sits within the league. I don't think they're going to be the 13th best offense in the NBA, but I do think they'll be more aesthetically pleasing to watch because there will be more variability to it. And look, I'm also a sucker for big men who do passes, and there's going to be a lot of that in this offense. There's going to be a lot of Jakob-Poeltl creating from the elbows. That's fun to me. I like it. I'm going to enjoy watching that more than I enjoyed last year. But like it or not, their most efficient pathways to scoring last season are being deprioritized or just aren't available to them anymore. The Fred Yak pick and roll was a cheat code. It was in the 96th percentile as far as when Fred and Yak were on the floor together, when that was their base play. The Raptors had a 96th percentile offensive rating, 122.3 offensive rating with Jakob-Poeltl and Fred VanVleet on the floor together last season. That is substantial. That would be the best offense in the NBA by a mile. That would be really, really good. When Fred VanVleet sat and Jakob-Poeltl was on the floor, which will be a big case for the Raptors this year, a lot of Yak with no Fred VanVleet or a similar style pull-up shooting threat point guard, The Raptors had a 104.1 offensive rating, second percentile in the NBA. You can dislike Fred all you want. And look, I get it. There are flaws in Fred VanVleet's game. We'll get to some of them coming up in this very segment, actually, that the Raptors might be better off without having on the roster. But there is no doubt that the Fred Yak pick and roll was the easiest pathway to offense for this team last year, and that's not available to them anymore. And that's going to hurt. That's going to bring their offensive efficiency down. You can't just go from 122.3 to 104.1 with just one player coming off the floor and expect you're going to fix that entire gap coming into this season without Fred VanVleet on the roster. It's not possible. It's really hard to figure a way they're going to do that because they don't have a traditional pick and roll ball handling point guard playing with Jakob Poeltl, who has a pull-up threat to his game. I don't think Dennis Schroeder is that type of guy. Dennis Schroeder does a lot of very good things. I'm excited to watch him play on this team, but it's a different skill set entirely than what Fred VanVleet brought to the table, and I think there's going to be some offensive atrophy not having that sort of go-to Fred Yak pick and roll. And also, like, Fred Pascal pick and roll has historically been one of their best plays. And that leads me to Pascal as well. You know, again, like it or not, whether it's quote-unquote selfish or not, Pascal Siakam isoing and kind of probing and working to the middle of the floor as a heliocentric creator was one of their best pathways to reasonable offense last season. It just was. Even if it's considered selfish and ugly to watch, which at times it can be, it just was their best pathway to, okay, this possession is going nowhere. Let's see if Pascal can bail us out. And oftentimes he could. If they're deprioritizing that this season and focusing more on Scottie Barnes with the ball in his hands, more as with Pascal off the ball, more with sort of elbow actions and stuff like that, it's going to be harder to have those sort of cheat code plays where you know, all right, things are breaking down here, but we know we can kind of throw it to Pascal. There will still be plenty of those possessions. I'm convinced of it. As was talked about on Media Day, the ball finds the best players. Pascal was the best player on this team. He will have to bail them out quite a bit, I'm sure. It might come as a result of more elaborate actions at the start of possessions, but I still think we're going to see this team have a lot of possessions where there's lots of churn. Yes, there's lots of ball movement, but it's not necessarily leading to great shots right away. And I think we could see a lot of possessions really come down to the late portions of the shot clock in which maybe Pascal Siakam becomes kind of a bailout guy for them, which isn't a bad thing. You know, he's good at it. He's going to have opportunities to do it. But if they're flowing less of the offense through him, if his usage rate's going to be lower, I think the avenue to clear efficient offense is going to be a little harder to find for the Raptors, at least in the half court. You know, they were 29th in half court offense last season. Do I think they'll be that bad? Probably not. I think they're probably something around 25th. If they can find a way to scrape between 18th and 22nd in half court offense, then you're laughing. That is huge. That's going to be a huge boon to them because I do think their transition attack is going to be awesome. And I think this really stands a chance of kind of lifting up what will be a pretty bad half-court offense. And I still think they're going to prioritize running off of misses. I think they're going to prioritize transition, but it'll be in a different way than they did last year, where, again, it was very sort of manufactured and gimmicky in like, okay, let's just go produce as many steals as we can. Let's produce a historic number of steals and score off of those. I think it's going to be more running off of rebounds in this case and sort of forcing teams into misses that you can then turn into quick offense. And I do think that the loss of Fred VanVleet will actually very much help the transition attack of this team, because Fred VanVleet, for all the good he did, was a miserable transition operator. Just really, really bad. Would just kind of drive into the teeth of the defense, try to score over guys too big, too much size for him to do it over. Not looking enough to spray it out. I think Scottie and Pascal, as the sort of orchestrators of this transition attack, OG to an extent as well, but mostly Scottie and Pascal, like we saw at the peak of the 2021-22 season in that second half where they cruised through the Eastern Conference to the second best record behind Boston in the last 50 games. That was all Pascal and Scottie just demolishing teams on the run. And those guys are special in the open floor. I think that's going to be where a lot of their bread gets buttered this season. And so while I think the half-court offense is going to be in the bottom five or so, I think on a per-possession basis, their transition game is going to be better. And I think that will help kind of, alleviate the stress of having a bad half-court offense. They just got to do it a lot. And they have to, again, do it more efficiently than they did last season. I think they're Also going to almost assuredly be a higher turnover team, which will affect their offensive rating as well. Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, for the last 10 years, this has been a ball security basketball team with smart point guards who don't turn the ball over. And Darko Rajakovic has talked about not necessarily thinking that turnovers are a bad thing, but if you're turning it over more often, that's more possessions that are leading to 0 points per possession. That's going to drag down the offensive rating as well. All of that considered, I think this team is going to be maybe better than some would paint. I think there's some folks out there who would say this is going to be like a bottom 5 offense overall. I do not think that. I think there's too much talent here. I think the transition game is going to be too good. I'm picking 19th on offense for the Raptors as my in-stone prediction as of right now. 19th feels about right. I think, again, the transition game will help buoy what should be a pretty not very productive half-court offense, but again, a better one to watch, one that's more aesthetically pleasing and more enjoyable. We'll see how much that lasts, how much the good feelings of watching a sort of revolutionized offense carry over if it doesn't lead to a lot of points. But for now, I'm excited to watch them play a little bit more of a creative style on the offensive end, even if I think there are fewer sort of obvious fallback set actions they can go to produce themselves easy points. 19th on offense. Again, if I'm right, congratulate me. If I'm wrong, I will forget I made this prediction by the time we finish recording the show. We'll come back on the other side, close it out with a look at the overall net rating and where the Raptors might come out and sort of the record and how this all will inform the record as well. We'll do that momentarily. But first, got to tell you, the Locked On Leafs, go check out our buds Mike and Dave talking about the buds over on Locked On Leafs each and every day. They're going to be interesting this year. They're going to score a ton. They're going to give up a lot of goals, probably. Very talented roster. Could very well go do the thing. But of course, it's the Leafs. So, disaster waits around every corner. Go listen to Locked On Leafs with Mike and Dave, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, let's round it out with a look at where I kind of think the Raptors will slot in net rating-wise. Again, extremely hard to pick this. It's very difficult. There's a lot of relativity at play. What other teams are doing is going to inform this more than what the Raptors are even doing. Like I kind of mentioned, their offense got better on a per possession basis after the Yak trade, but they got worse in offense. Like it's very much dependent on the rest of the league and the league trends and stuff like that. Like I said, though, I do think the interplay between the offense and defense is going to be a lot more balanced this season. And I think that is a pretty good way to start. I think that's going to be conducive to a healthier style of basketball where you're not having to compromise so much. You're not having to give up so much in order to just kind of try to fuel your offense, which is so moribund. I think the depth of the roster as well is a big thing here. Like, they're going to run more guys. They're going to have fresher legs. They're going to be able to, again, if they're not sort of flying around on defense all the time, I think there will be some energy conservation and all that. And I think just the variable lineup choices that Darko Rajakovic is going to have are going to be helpful. They're going to be fewer spells where the Raptors are rolling out lineups that simply have no shot of scoring points. And, we're not going to see as many of those stretches where it's like, all right, can we win this 4-minute stretch 2-1 or whatever? They're going to actually have, shooting and space and, I think some offensive talent on the floor at basically all times. There will be better lineups than others, of course. Frankly, I kind of think the starting lineup with Dennis Schroeder stands a chance of being one of those lineups that has a hard time scoring because of the lack of spacing and shooting. But overall, I think they have more lineup variability, different looks they can go to, more ways to sort of put teams on the back foot, whether it's going big, whether it's going small with, a Scotty Barnes at the 5 or something like that. I think there's a lot of potential there for, the bench lineups of this team to be a lot better and to kind of carry the offensive, just not even just the offense. I think the defense will stand up pretty well on the bench side as well. I think the bench units will help carry this team to a bit of a more promising overall net rating. I don't think they're going to have a lineup like they had last year, where there was such a core lineup with Jakob Poeltl, where they just bludgeoned teams when they were on the floor by, double-digit points per 100 possessions. It's hard to do that. Those are the very best lineups in basketball. That was the Raptors starting 5 with Yak last year. It was one of the best lineups in basketball. I don't think they'll have a core lineup that's that potent, but I think they'll have more lineups that don't actively stink, which is nice. I think we'll probably see as well, though, a bit of a drawback because last year the Raptors ran essentially a playoff rotation every night, and that, I think, inflated their net rating. They finished with a plus 1.5 net rating last season. It was good for 12th in the NBA. I think as a whole, that's like a 45 win team's net rating. I don't think they were really a 45 win team. I think they manufactured that net rating by playing their best players a ton, and it's just not tenable to do over the course of 82 games. We saw that. It saps your development, it saps your energy, it saps a whole lot of stuff. And so while they were a 41-41 team with a net rating of a 45-ish win team, I think, again, we'll probably see that net rating scale back a little bit just because they're not going to roll those sort of starter heavy lineups all the time. The bench lineups, like I said, I think will be pretty good, but I don't think they'll be like so amazing that they net this thing out to a 45 win team's net rating necessarily. I think the defense is going to give them a high floor. Like, I certainly would hit the over on 36.5 wins if you're the type of person who bets money on basketball over-unders. I think we know also, though, from recent history that offense is more of a driving factor of success in the regular season than defense. At least in the last few years, it's tilted that way. And so I think there will be a ceiling on this team in the regular season as well. All told, I think they probably come in with a net rating in the upper half of the league, somewhere between 12th and 15th. I think it'll be a positive net rating, but I don't think it'll be by like a ton. I think their ultimate win total is also going to be, less tied to the net rating and more tied to how they perform in sort of variance-based situations. Three-point shooting luck is one, but also clutch performances, which they were brutal at last season. We'll see if they can find some sort of clutch offense this season. I do think with the way the roster's set up, I think they stand a chance of maybe kind of not being so good in the clutch again this year, just because it's going to be hard for them to manufacture offense when teams are really dialed in, when the lack of spacing is cramping up the floor and making it difficult to get to the spots you want to get to. And so I could see this team kind of giving some back as a clutch team, even if their overall net rating is sort of a little bit better. So with all that, I kind of think I'd pick them in the ballpark similar to last season, a touch worse. I think somewhere between like a plus 0.8 and a plus 1.2 net rating, and a record probably quite similar to last year. Maybe like a 43-39, maybe a 42-40. We'll see. Again, I think that defense is going to be really good. It's all going to come down to clutch stuff, and they could easily go 37-45 if the clutch performance is really, really bad. But I do think we'll see them kind of net out to a net rating that's pretty close to what their record will end up being when you kind of factor in all the stuff we've gone through today. There's a million factors that go into this, all these different variables, so it's, again, impossible to predict, but 0.8 to plus 1.2, kind of the range I'd expect. 14th in the league, something like that. And then, right around 500. Maybe they get a little bit better, 43-39 if you get some shooting luck, stuff like that. The thing is, that would be an improvement. No doubt. It would be a step up. If the defense is like elite and the offense gets by and they end up being around 500, put a couple extra wins on the board, I think you'd qualify that as an improvement over last season. But is it enough improvement to give the front office the clarity it seems to be looking for when it comes to the futures of the very important players on the team, like Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby? That I'm not so sure about. Does an extra 2 wins really change your life if you're the front office and you have ownership breathing down your neck and looking for more? Is that enough to say, all right, this is enough to, give Pascal all the money? Is this enough to want to give OG Anunoby $35 to $40 million a year next summer? Because that's probably what's going to take if you don't want him to go walk to some other team that throws him a massive offer. It's probably going to be determined on the individual player level. Like, how does Pascal Siakam look within the construct of this team? Maybe less tied to the record, but I do think, it'll be better, but how much better, and how much better does it have to be to really give the front office the clarity it wants? That, to me, is kind of the big overarching question hanging over this whole thing. But again, offense, I think will be better to look at, and the transition will be a ton of fun. The half court could be a pretty big slog, and I think, it'll also get better as the season goes along. This is what happens, right? I think, you kind of get more accustomed to the scheme. You get more comfortable playing with one another. The offense will uptick, but that happens for basically every team, as I kind of covered earlier. Every team's offense gets better as the season goes along. But again, I think the process could get a little smoother and all this stuff, and they'll figure some stuff out, get creative. They'll have counters they'll work in, all of that. But again, I think the offense stands to be the thing that kind of drags this team down a little bit. It'll be more fun to watch. Probably not as potent as last year, because I think they got a little bit lucky in terms of where they finished. Again, they were one clunker away from not being the 12th best offense in basketball. So with all that, again, the defense is where this team is going to hang its hat. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm really excited to watch that. Overall, I think this team, I think I'm coming around on them being a plus 500 team and being in the sort of upper crust of the play-in conversation more than I was maybe a month or two ago. Because of that defense, I really think is going to be awesome, but we'll see. There's obviously other teams to improve in the Eastern Conference as well. Maybe we take the Charlotte Hornets, that totally rudderless, bad franchise, off the board. Maybe we take the Wizards, obviously, off the board. The Magic, I think, are maybe a year away. The Pistons are going to be bad. Like, the Raptors are going to be in the play-in. I feel like pretty confident about that at minimum. Their upward mobility, I think it will come down to that offense and how much they can kind of smooth things out and how much they allow themselves to dip back into Pascal, please save us as sort of an offensive philosophy, because that can produce points. We know that, even if it's not the sexiest way of doing it. Anyway, that'll leave it for today. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. We'll be back again next week as we continue our tee-up of the season. We're less than 2 weeks away now. It's very exciting. There's a game against Cairns on Sunday. That'll be fun. Probably not all that informative as it's against an Australian team, and we'll see what we can kind of pull away as takeaways from it, but excited to see that. A few more preseason games next week as well to dig into. Looking forward to all that. We will have our over-under special with Vivek and Sahal coming up soon. We're going to have an episode very soon as well with Joseph Cacharo of The Score doing some bold predictions. We'll have all sorts of great stuff on tap before the season begins. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in. Subscribe, follow, rate, review, tell a friend. Love you very much for supporting the show, for being an everydayer. And we will talk to you again on Monday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Join the Discord, link in the description. As always, that's fun too. Tell a friend, etc., etc. Have a lovely weekend. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.